Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and good afternoon from Triton's Consulting here in Bethesda, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., and welcome to today's webinar. This afternoon's topic is how you and your teams can avoid the top 10 pitfalls of change management and user adoption planning in your enterprise. We have a lot of returning registrants on today's call and a whole lot of new registrants from around the country and the world, so welcome to you all. Please feel free to submit your individual questions during the webinar. Simply use the Chat with Presenter window on your screen, and we will do our best in the time allotted to answer each question we receive today. If for any reason we run short on time in today's program, each question will be individually answered via email from Tritons. Our presenters today are Jason Whitehead, CEO of Triton's Consulting, and our Principal Consultant and Head of Service Delivery, Ms. Jen McLean-Rogan. We will begin today's webinar in just a moment. We anticipate completing the presentation portion in approximately 35 to 40 minutes, and then take questions for the remaining 15 to 20 minutes of our time. Please feel free to add your questions as we go, and if you prefer to send them by email, send them to questions@tritons.com. Now, without further ado, may I present Jason Whitehead and Jen McLean-Rogan.
Great, thank you very much. Hi everyone, my name is Jason Whitehead, CEO and founder of Tritons. Really excited to have you here today. We found when we work with our clients that they often spend a lot of time and money that gets wasted on taking the wrong approach to change management and user adoption. And we know that how valuable and scarce resources are today. And we wanted to help you get the most out of this time. So we wanted to share with you what are some of the common pitfalls that we find in change management and provide some tips and suggestions for more effective user adoption programs. So we're really excited about sharing this information with you and hope you find this to be a valuable use of your time. To do this, what we're going to do is spend just a couple seconds sharing with you a little bit about who we are so that you understand the perspective we bring and create some context for the presentation. And then we're going to spend a bit of time talking about what are some of the differences between change management and user adoption and how you can use this knowledge to drive a more effective user adoption program in your organizations or with your clients. We'll then move into the top 10 pitfalls and spend most of our time there. And then we've left quite a bit of time for questions and answers at the end. And as we said earlier, please don't feel you need to wait to the end to enter your questions in the chat window. As soon as something comes to mind, please put it in there and we'll do our best to get a good answer to you at the end of the webinar today. I'm excited to share that our audience today includes a variety of people from all different perspectives on here. So we've got some people that work for organizations that are probably implementing technology internally in their organizations, as well as several people that work for software vendors and cloud companies that sell on a subscription basis that are trying to figure out how they can be more effective working with their clients. So we hope that this information will work very well for both of you, and we're going to try and share some insights that's relevant to all audiences as we go along. So moving on to who we are, Tritons is a dynamic user adoption and customer success consulting firm. We do work with both medium and large size organizations that are implementing technology internally and that need to make sure that they drive and sustain effective user adoption over the life of the system. As well as we work with the software vendors and organizations that sell technology on a subscription basis to help them develop the customer success programs they need to make sure that their customers are getting the full value from their software. So we've been doing this for over 10 years. We have a lot of great experience, and we've done a lot of interesting client projects, and we're going to try and share some insights from that today as we go. So just a little bit about your presenters today. So my background has been coming up through the ranks of hands-on information system implementations. I have an academic background in both information systems as well as organization development and human resources, and spent the early part of my career really working to implement enterprise technology, particularly CRM systems and finance systems with large-scale organizations and global implementations. I then spent a large portion of my career focusing on driving and sustaining adoption of that technology, and that really has become my passion area, and that became really the focus area of Tritons, is to help fill that critical gap that exists, and really look forward to sharing a lot of my perspective with you. And then I'd like to turn this over to my co-host, Jen McLean-Rogan, who is a delivery manager and principal here at Tritons.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jen McLean-Rogan. I've been in the IT and user adoption field for more than 18 years now. And my educational background is in business administration and human resource development, and I'd say most of my career has been leading user adoption efforts for large-scale, enterprise-wide technology implementations. And I've both witnessed and experienced the struggle that comes with trying to incorporate new technology into one's daily practices. As a result, I made it my career mission to help people understand how to identify and overcome those barriers and potential pitfalls that often get in the way of using and, more importantly, gaining value from technology.
Great. So I think to finalize the context setting portion here, just wanted to really share what we're hoping you'll take away from this webinar today is that there's a lot of assumptions that people do today when it comes to change management and user adoption that they have, and they seem to repeat a lot of practices that have proven over time not to be effective. And we want to make sure that people become more aware of that so they can find more effective alternatives going forward. I love this quote from Mark Twain that says, it ain't what you know that gets you in trouble, it's what you know that just ain't so. And I think when we work with a lot of our clients, and Jen, you've seen this a lot too, it's that people come in and they're pretty sure that they know what all of their challenges and issues are, and then when we get in and actually talk with them and their staff and their end users, we find out there's a lot of blind spots and a lot of barriers and a lot of unknown issues that were there that we had to surface for them. And when we do, they go, wow, you're right, I didn't realize that was there. So I guess the first piece is don't assume that you know what are the challenges that you face as well as the methods to address them. And then I think the other one that really has come up time and time again is the Albert Einstein quote, which is insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So many of the projects we work on, we find that people keep taking the traditional change management approach, and they've done this for years and years and years with their implementations, and yet they consistently suffer with poor user adoption and not getting the ROI that they want. And we're like, well, if you keep doing the same thing, of course you keep getting the same results. So what we're finding here is that there's so much that can be done differently and more effectively from a user adoption perspective, and we're hoping to share that today.
Hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll have some new ideas for different ways of doing things to get better results.
Absolutely.
So to set the foundation, let's take a look at the difference between change management and user adoption. People seem to use these terms almost synonymously because they don't really understand the difference. So let's take a moment just to define these terms. Change management is by far the more common term. It's been around for a while, and it's typically used as an all-encompassing term for the management of change and development within an organization. User adoption, on the other hand, is a term that's still being socialized, and it means different things to different people. For example, when we ask our clients, how do they define user adoption? We often hear them say that user adoption is deployment of new technology, or it's getting software on desktops, or it's training and communications about that technology. And these are all typical change management activities and important pieces of user adoption. However, user adoption is much bigger than that. And as thought leaders in user adoption, we define it as a focus on achieving the measurable business value that you want and need from your IT investments by enabling people to incorporate the technology into their daily work habits, as well as driving and sustaining proper use of the technology over the life of that system. And it's important to understand the difference, especially when there are so many companies out there that say they do user adoption, when in reality they're really doing change management activities and calling it user adoption. So let's take a closer look at the difference between change management activities and user adoption activities. For most organizations, traditional change management activities are largely focused on training and communications. Training is primarily the point-and-click system training that's offered via classroom, manuals, and online. And the communications are primarily one-way communications out to end users via email, meetings, and conferences, telling end users about the benefits of the system and when it's going live. And typically that's where change management efforts stop, which ignores a number of important activities that are needed to help end users understand expectations for using the system, such as updating your policies and processes, updating job descriptions with new roles, responsibilities, and required skills and competencies for using the system. So here are some staggering stats that are pretty hard to ignore on why effective user adoption efforts are so important. 70% of CRM projects fail as a result of a lack of user adoption. And 50% of software functionality that's been paid for is not actually used, which is a huge sunk cost for most organizations. And 47% of companies reported that projects are often in jeopardy due to serious challenges with user adoption. So with numbers like that, it's very clear that organizations are struggling with user adoption and falling prey to pitfalls. So let's talk about those pitfalls. Let's do it. So for the purpose of this webinar, we've narrowed it down to 10 pitfalls, which wasn't easy to do, by the way. But these are the most common pitfalls that we see and that we proactively mitigate with our clients to keep them on the right path to success. So Jason's going to kick off their first pitfall, and just as a quick reminder, please type in any questions that you have in the chat area and we'll answer them at the end.
Great, thanks, Jen. Okay, so for those of you who've been on some of our earlier webinars, some of this might seem familiar, but it's so core and so critical, and every time we go through this, we see people's eyes light up of, yeah, this is what's going on. And I think the first one really here is that focusing on go live instead of what happens after go live. And we want to try and just walk you through visually why that's a mistake. So when we look at most IT projects, typically here at the beginning of time, someone gets some idea that some technology can help us and it'll be great and it will deliver all kinds of value to our organization. But that value is going to be realized some point in the future, whether it's 6 months down the road or 6 years, depending on the size of the implementation and the project and where you need to go. So they're like, yeah, we want that and it's worth our time and money to get there. And in a perfect world, we could just jet right there. But in reality, there's a whole lot of effort that has to happen to get requirements, design the system, build the system, transform data, and test it, and get people going and training. And then at some point, right around the go live here, you'll do a little change management in that traditional form. And again, Jen, as you said, typically point-and-click system training, some communication on what's in it for me, and one-way communication on how great this is going to be. And that's where a lot of IT projects stop. And if they hit that go live on time and on budget, they consider a success. And the problem is, as you can see right here, there is a huge gap between when you've stopped your effort and declared success versus when you've actually achieved that business outcome, that business goal that you want. And if you stop there and if you don't have a plan for moving forward, all of this is at risk and you may never get there. And time again, we ask customers and prospective customers, hey, what's your plan for what you're going to do after go live to drive that adoption and make sure you hit those goals? And many times it's just crickets. Like, oh, we hadn't thought of that. We don't even know where to do that. No one's told us we need to do that. What does that look like? So really, if you don't have a plan to move here, we find a lot of companies just don't go all the way up and actually break even again, let alone achieve these benefits. So really what you need to do is have an approach and take efforts after go live to hit that success that you want. And that's why when you remember that the traditional change management is right here focused on go live, there's this huge gap, you need to do something more, and that's what we call the user adoption piece. So when we look at what typically happens on a traditional change management focused project, you get a lot of what we call the train and forget approach and trying to sell staff on the latest and often what we call the go live and go home folks. And then when nothing happens afterwards or you don't quite get up that curve and you don't mitigate that risk, then it's usually some flavor of low and limited system use and the blame the user or the train then blame approach as we often call it. And if organizations don't get that results that they want, they're not getting the ROI, and this is really critical for the software vendors out there, they're not going to renew. And if you are internally implementing that technology, if you don't overcome these challenges, you're not going to get the results that you want, and the people who funded the project and who are really looking for that business outcome, they're not going to consider it a success as well. So that's really what the user adoption effort is meant to help mitigate. So when you think of it in that context, it becomes pretty obvious. Why would you focus all of your time and effort here before go live when all the value is created over here, and that you need to come back up this cost recovery curve to actually get the outcomes that you want? So that's our number one big thing is focusing on go live instead of beyond.
Exactly. So using that as the foundation, our next pitfall is number 2, which is focusing on the functionality of the system versus actual use of the system. The simple fact is getting your technology to work is pretty easy because technology basically does what you tell it to do. On the other hand, getting people to work with your technology is hard. and it can feel like an uphill battle if you don't understand how to enable, drive, and sustain human behavioral change. A great quote that we heard recently at a conference that Jason and I like to say is, "It's not the software that fails, it's the fleshware." Because let's face it, learning new ways of working is really hard because you need to unlearn old ways of working. And we often find that companies don't plan for the time and effort it takes for people to form new habits and to use the technology as intended. So we use the rule of thumb that developing technology is 20% of the work, and user adoption is really 80% of the work to facilitate user success with the technology.
Absolutely.
And I think a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I use this picture a lot. As you can see from the picture, just because you design a good system, it doesn't mean users will adopt it. And this is because user adoption is not a technical issue. It's a business issue, and it's a human issue. You can build a system with all the bells and whistles you could ever want, but if people don't know how to change their habits to incorporate those bells and whistles into their daily routine, then you've just wasted a lot of time, money, and effort implementing a system that won't be used.
You know, that's so true, and it's not just changing their habits, but also making sure that the new habits they develop enable other users to be successful, especially with large-scale enterprise system and collaboration systems. It's enabling the success of others. I think, Jen, it's fascinating to watch when Jen was delivering a training course the other day, and the executives came up to me afterwards and said that was such a big aha that it's a business issue, not a technical issue. And that opened up so many possibilities to them once they reframed what is user adoption and what are the challenges we need to face. It was amazing to watch.
Yeah, once people change the way they think about user adoption, then their actions follow.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next pitfall is focusing on one-way communication instead of two-way engagement. And this is one that really does come up time and time again, and it's so critical here. We get a lot of people here that come in, and the practice is to try and sell people on the benefits of the new system and tell them how great it's going to be for them. And we hear people say all the time, "You got to focus on what's in it for me." And in reality, that message usually falls flat and it's not effective, which is counterintuitive to some folks. But when you actually look behind it, there's a variety of reasons for that. I think one of the most is coming up with this "what's in it for me" message. You need to understand what's important to people, and what's important to your end users will vary across your user base. So what's important to an end user who's early in their career and just out of school is going to be very different to someone who's midway through their career and a working parent and has all kinds of things going on, as well as someone who's 6 months to a year away from retirement. They want different things from their job experience. And they're looking for different rewards and recognition, or sometimes they're looking just not to be hassled at all. So there's a whole lot of different things behind that. And if you come in with a standard "what's in it for me" and try and cheer people on, it's going to fall flat. And I think the other piece around that too is folks do a mental cost benefit analysis here, and they say, well, what's it cost me to make this change? Either it's going to cost me more time, I may lose prestige, I may lose authority, I may do other things. This really is not a good thing for me personally, and it's very, very rare that you'll get people to work against their own self-interest over the long term. And I think what we found tends to be a better message around this is it's less around telling people on what's in it for me, but instead saying, the rules have now changed. What made you successful yesterday won't make you successful going forward because it's a different world now. We have new processes, new technology, we need different things, we have new priorities. Instead, let us tell you what's changing and what it's going to take for you to be successful in that new world and how we're going to help you through that process. A very different message than trying to sell someone on what's in it for them. I think the next piece that really comes up all the time too is that there are a lot of blind spots out there, and when you focus on one-way communication, you don't really surface a lot of those. But instead, when you engage people, when you ask them what's important to them and you get their input all along the way, you discover so much, and you can really illuminate a lot of blind spots and a lot of barriers that you may not know were out there. And once you recognize those, then you can take action to address them. So you need to talk to end users and managers and supervisors and leverage their experience and expertise and learn their concerns and their risks, and recognize that transitioning into new ways of working is a very personal, very emotional experience, and this is a key way to help people navigate that evolution. I think this also has to happen throughout the process. It can't be something you do just at go live or early on when you're gathering some requirements and then forget all about it. It really does need to go all the way through. And I think what a lot of people forget as well too is that every every time you have a two-way engagement with someone, it's really an opportunity to help them shift their behavior and to reinforce those desired new ways of working and to get them to think differently. And you can ask questions in a way that they will have new ideas or new insights that they probably didn't have before that makes it easier for them to adopt your technology. So it's really important, but it's also very tough to be able to do effectively.
And I think the earlier you start your two-way engagement, the more effective you'll be throughout the user adoption process.
Oh,
never too early to start.
Absolutely.
Okay, and pitfall number 4 is focusing on user resistance instead of user success. So we've seen many people fall into this trap of blaming the users for not adopting a system when oftentimes there are organizational barriers that prevent users from adopting the system even if they want to. For example, if there are conflicting priorities or the users aren't given enough time to experiment and practice using the system, then it's going to be hard for them to adopt it. This is a management issue. It's completely outside of the user's control, and it's up to leadership to adjust goals and priorities in the short term to get the results that are needed in the long term. And blaming poor user adoption on user resistance may be convenient, but it may not be accurate. And it's a signal to you that you have more work to do to determine the root causes of poor user adoption within your organization.
Absolutely. You know, one of my favorite quotes is, we judge ourselves by our intentions, but we judge others by their actions. And I think so often with adoption work and when we hear about resistance, what we see is people will observe an action and ascribe a meaning to it, and they will label that as resistance. But they may not understand, are there barriers outside of users' control, like you identified, that prevent them from doing what you want, or was there some other reason? So until you investigate the reasons for those actions and the intentions behind it, you don't know if it's resistance or something else. And in my experience, 90% of the times it's something other than resistance.
Right. And I think to drive user adoption, it's okay to question someone. If you hear someone in your organization using that term user resistance, ask them why. What actions did they observe? Why did they label that user resistant?
Yeah. How do you know?
How do you know? And make some suggestions on some organizational barriers that might get in the way. This will help you help your organization begin to recognize those assumptions and begin doing things differently and really digging deeper into the root causes of poor user adoption.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so in addition to blaming user resistance, we often see leaders turn to more training as the solution when they realize that they have user adoption issues. And unfortunately, training is rarely the problem, and it's not usually enough to get people to use a system. It's really important to match your user adoption activities to your users' needs. And rushing to implement training before you identify, again, those root causes of issues is a great way to waste a lot of time and money without getting the results you want and need.
Absolutely. Again, the assumption being that that's going to be the cure-all.
Yeah.
A little bit. Which brings us to number 5. And surprisingly enough, not clearly defining success and goals and what you want. It absolutely amazes me when we talk with a lot of customers. We're like, you've got a business case, but what are your adoption goals? What does success look like? And what does it look like for different groups in your organization, whether it's IT, whether it's end user department X or Y, sales or marketing or finance? It may be different. So like, we don't really have specific goals for these user groups, and we haven't defined what success looks like for them. And we haven't defined it over this longitudinal 3, 5, 10-year period. Thinking about success in terms of business outcomes over the life of the system is absolutely key and critical. So I think that's a big one that surprises me, and the need to get very specific, because if your goal here is to be able to align user behavior and working styles and working habits with the desired business outcome, you've got to be really clear on what that means, and then you need to figure out how you can make it measurable and cascade it down throughout the organization. One of the things I want to point out too, for the folks that work for software vendors right now, when you're working with your clients, you need to understand how they define business success and business outcomes and over what time period, because that becomes their renewal criteria. And if you can't make sure that they're achieving those goals, chances are they're not going to renew, or they'll only renew a certain amount of licenses or cut back, or they won't add new functionality. So it's really important that you understand that as well. Which I think the other approach is keeping in mind as you're looking at this and thinking in terms of business outcomes, remembering that success here is the same in many ways of your IT investment as is for your 401k. You may be up and getting great value one year, but you can be back down the next year if you stop paying attention, you don't recalibrate your portfolio. If you have great adoption year one or year two, but then people get busy or other priorities shift and it starts to wane, the value of your IT investment goes down. And that's a problem for both the organization, but also for the software vendors who count on that consistent value for their customers to renew.
Great point. And pitfall number 6 is not assigning ownership and accountability at every level of the organization. So many organizations spend millions of dollars on system implementations without having thought about what it takes to ensure success and whose job it is to make that happen. So ownership of a system, we get this question a lot, needs to rest on a senior business executive who is responsible for achieving the business outcomes. For example, if it's an HR system that's being deployed, then the head of HR should be the owner. If it's a marketing system, then the head of marketing. I think you get where I'm going with that. It shouldn't be the IT executive unless it's a system that's specifically for the IT department. So the senior executive needs to have overall accountability, authority, and required resources to drive and sustain adoption. And there needs to be rewards and consequences to the executive if they miss, meet, or exceed user adoption and ROI goals. Quite simply, ownership must be meaningful and impactful, and more than just empty words. If there aren't rewards or consequences that directly impact the senior executive, then they probably won't care about the results or make the project a priority, and we see that happen all the time. This is a really important piece.
I can't stress this one enough because without that executive support and executive action, you won't get very far. In fact, when I'm talking with a lot of our client CEOs, they're often asking, well, who should be responsible and who should be accountable for this, and what does that need to look like, and how do we make sure this happens? And it's got to be that senior person, typically who has the budget authority or responsible for getting those business outcomes, and they have to be motivated to take action. So it's got to be that combination of motivated plus authority and ability to deliver the results. And this is also can be challenging because you do get people saying, well, you're holding me something accountable for or things I don't have direct control over because there is the IT component, there are the other things. So it takes some effort there at that executive level to get all the agreements in place that you need of who's going to make sure this actually happens. Right. It's challenging.
And then it's also important to remember to not just focus on executives. You really need to cascade ownership throughout the organization to change day-to-day work practices and behaviors. And when we work with clients, we often ask them, what role do you expect your managers to play in driving adoption? And oftentimes the answer is, wow, we hadn't thought of that.
No.
So when I'm coaching clients, I always stress the importance of involving your managers and supervisors in planning and leading your adoption efforts because they have the most direct influence on staff performance in making sure systems are used consistently and effectively. So don't be afraid to set specific user adoption targets for your managers. Monitor and measure the results and hold them accountable, just like the executives, for ensuring that their staff use the system as intended. But don't forget to give them the tools and the training and the support they need to achieve those targets. Please don't make the mistake of assuming they know how to drive user adoption because most managers don't. It's just not what they do. So we spend a lot of time working with managers to help build their knowledge, their skills, and their capacity to accelerate and drive adoption.
Absolutely. This is another area when I've seen you teach the training course to clients and they have the big ahas and you go into so much detail around why this is important and the ins and outs of it. Always get a lot of head nods and people coming up afterwards saying, we had never thought about that. It's absolutely critical. But I think the other piece around that too that has come up has been when you do build that management capacity to drive adoption and performance within their organization, they apply those skills well beyond just the IT project that you were initially brought in for, and they get such an added value from that. It's incredible. It
can benefit everything that they do. Those skills that you need for user adoption are very beneficial. And if you can get managers and leaders involved, it's going to make your job a whole lot easier because you have more people working diligently to ensure success of that system.
Absolutely. And I think, so this brings us to pitfall number 7, because typically at this point people are like, well, how do we start to do that and where do we begin and what does that need to look like? And one of the mistakes that we see time and time again is people, again, assume that they know what's going on and they don't do that initial gap analysis, which is really that starting point to say, what are the adoption barriers and drivers, what's going to get us in trouble, where do we need to go, and how do we get there? So number 1 pitfall is not doing that. when we look at what's going on bridging the gap here, you can waste a lot of time and money and effort doing things that are not effective. And you need to be able to have some informed understanding of what will be effective and how do I know and how do I get there. And there's so much stuff we could do. How do I prioritize that? So this gap analysis is absolutely critical. And the type of analysis that we're talking about here is really an adoption analysis, where it's how do we figure out what's going to prevent people from changing the way they work on a day-to-day basis. How do we make sure that they incorporate these new systems into their daily practices and processes? And it takes a lot of effort to get there. And typically there's basically triangulation of you need to interview people at all different levels of the organization and get sources from different pieces, from focus groups and interviews and documents, and looking at data from the way systems are used and all kinds of good stuff. And when we also talk with clients about this analysis phase, like, well, how do you do it? What are you looking for? And that's really looking for areas of agreement and disagreement, looking for areas of incomplete information, looking for gaps, looking where there's just misaligned incentives and perceptions all the way through, and trying to map out and identify what's noise versus what's critical. It's absolutely essential to get there because a lot of people, as we said before, they don't know what their challenges are. So the first place you need to really start in here is that analysis, which really leads to the next piece, which is it's so critical. If you get this part wrong, everything that follows it, your plan, your execution on the adoption program is going to struggle and it's going to suffer. So we think it's really important to get that done. And here's where we'd like to remind people that really the skills to do this type of adoption analysis are probably different than what you may have had in the past or what you would want to do. This is not requirements gathering. This is not an IT issue. This is an organizational change, a business change, a day-to-day working habits change. You need skills in that. Whenever we've seen people try to have either junior staff or unexperienced staff or IT staff do this, they usually end up in trouble and pretty quickly. So we really encourage people to make sure you have the right folks doing it. And how you get there matters. And I think the last piece around that is many organizations say people won't share accurate information because of politics and fear to our direct internal staff. We want to have a third party come in who can be a neutral party that can help provide some anonymity and also help us make sure we're looking for the right thing. So this is an area where, if nothing else, you may need help here and then figure out what you can do internally to actually drive adoption.
Having someone who knows what to listen for and what to look for in the answers to the questions is really helpful, because sometimes that's what people aren't saying.
Exactly.
That means a lot and could have a great impact on your user adoption efforts. So again, bringing that neutral third party in has been very beneficial to the clients that we've worked with in the past, and we've helped them out with the gap analysis.
Yeah. And I think to the earlier point too is this is a high engagement opportunity, and this not only provides information so you can develop an effective program and an efficient one, it starts the change process with the people who participate in it and starts getting them thinking differently and performing differently.
Okay, and pitfall number 8 is not having a clear and specific plan of action to enable drive and sustain user adoption. So in developing your user adoption action plan, avoid the famous Seinfeld quote of yada, yada, yada that is so often used to gloss over the details. If you want people to understand how to get from point A to point B and what you need them to do, then you need to turn your yada, yada, yada into who, what, when, and be very clear and specific to the point of annoying, or at least come close to it. Use RACI charts, use flow charts, whatever tools and activities will help you think through and document your user adoption plan. For example, having discussions with stakeholders on expectations for using the system needs to be a part of your action plan. The timing and process you use to have those discussions needs to be a part of your action plan. Who, how, and when you will monitor and measure use of the system needs to be a part of your action plan. If you see where I'm going with this, all the details need to be in your action plan so that people can have coordinated action towards something. And most of our clients find this part very difficult because it's not easy to develop a clear and specific plan when you don't know what you don't know. So that's where we can help. Our job is to help you see what you can't see, know what you don't know, so you don't have to rely on tiny miracles to get you to your desired future state.
Or big miracles.
Or big miracles in some cases, right. It's also important to remember that user adoption plans are not a one-size-fits-all. You really need to adjust your plan and your methods based on the system and your organizational needs. For example, the adoption actions you take for a small, fast-moving implementation of a few weeks or months is very different than the actions you would take for a large-scale implementation of a core system over several years. And as we said before, how you do this matters. Collaboration and engagement are key. I always say to my clients, people need to be a part of creating what they're expected to support and implement. This means that you'll need to involve and facilitate discussions with IT, end users, leadership, anyone who will be impacted by the system, as well as analyze that input and use it. Use that input to develop an effective action plan. And a good principle to remember that Jason likes to say, and I'm going to tee this up for you, Jason, is it's not how fast you go.
It's how many people you bring along with you.
Exactly.
And that's so critical, especially with collaboration systems, enterprise systems that are meant to have everyone working collaboratively and off of a central repository or database or whatever it may be, or common workflows and processes. It's got to be everyone doing it the same, because if some people are using it well and others aren't, you're not going to get the results you want. And I think to your point with the one-size-fits-all, so many times the technology can go live faster than the people can adapt to it, and adopt it. And it's so important to recognize that and say there's going to be a lot of work to do after go live to bring people along. Which I think really leads to this other one, pitfall number 9, and that's not having the right mix of people, processes, and tools to drive adoption. We consistently find that there are a lot of people out there who have certain ranges of expertise, whether it's technology expertise or business process expertise or project management, but it's not a lot of people who really have this adoption expertise inside a lot of organizations. And they need to build that capacity, and they need to figure it out over time. One of Jen's other favorite images is this one, the soundboard. It's kind of like user adoption is like driving a sound system, and you need to know what dials and levers to push and at what intensity to get the results that you want. And it's never the same in any one organization. You have to calibrate to where you are, and it may even change within different departments or offices or locations within an organization to understand their needs. And this is especially true with global organizations with different cultures and languages and all of that good stuff. And it's not easy to do. My early background in IT systems, implementing technology didn't really prepare me for the challenges of driving adoption. It was only when I layered in more of the HR and OD experience and working with groups that I realized how to make it effective in an IT context. So it really is challenging. And I think what you also need to look at here is that technology is going to create disruption, and you need to have the capacity to address it and deal with it. To your point, adoption is not a technology issue, it's a business and a people issue, and you need to make sure that the methods and approaches you take are going to address those needs and those issues. And there is also, to your point earlier, there's a time component over this, and what it takes to get initial change versus sustaining it is different, and how you make that scalable. And this is, I think, especially critical for the software vendors out there that are thinking about their customer success services. Is so many of your customers that are going to struggle with adoption issues. One, they probably don't have the right skill mix internally to do this, or the experience to know how to do it effectively, and you've got to help them with that. And then 2, you've got to do it in a scalable way that you can help all of your customers so that they renew. And trying to figure out how to identify what are those services that will move the needle for your customers, and then how to make them repeatable and scalable and affordable is a big challenge, and that's often where people come and say help.
Mm-hmm. And the last pitfall, number 10, is not evaluating and evolving your user adoption effort. To avoid this pitfall, we recommend that you create a learning community by having ongoing multi-level lessons learned sessions throughout your organization. This will help you know if your adoption efforts are working and things are changing, or if you're just spinning your wheels and wasting time and money. It's a good idea to establish this learning community prior to go live and have frequent sessions within the first 6 to 12 months post go live while end users are forming new habits using the system, or what you don't want, which is forming new habits to work around the system. And it's at this time that's very crucial, because people could really benefit from asking questions and learning how others are using the system to do their jobs. Peer-to-peer knowledge sharing is really powerful, so make sure you give people the space and time to share their experiences, their thoughts, their ideas, and best practices. This is a very easy and effective way to create that ripple effect of positive change across your organization. Oh, and be sure to create a mechanism to store the lessons learned that are discussed during these sessions. So that it's okay, and a lot of people don't do this, but that way you can incorporate those lessons learned into future user adoption efforts and plans. And as your system matures, your lessons learned sessions can occur less frequently, but don't forget to continue monitoring your environment over the life of the system so that you can address any emerging issues and opportunities that may affect adoption, because your internal and your external environment will continue to change. And so you may need to pivot, you may need to course correct, but be careful because change doesn't happen in a vacuum. When you make one change, it kicks off a domino effect in which you may undo something that's working, or you may unintentionally create a new problem, like removing accountability for achieving a stated goal. So make sure that when you are making course correction decisions, that you're taking that holistic approach to your decisions. And if you need to shift your goals in any way because of changes in your environment, make sure that everyone is still clear on ownership and expectations in order to sustain adoption over the life of the system.
And that's so true. I mean, when you look at what changes in your organization over time, staff comes in, hires and retires and all that good stuff. And I think that the other critical one that's missed, if you're in a high-growth industry or high-growth environment where things are rapidly changing and you're adding new people and hiring like crazy, you're doing an acquisition and merging in, things change very, very quickly, and you need to adjust for all of that.
Right. So now that we've covered the top 10 pitfalls, do you think that you're on the right path to success? So I've got some questions listed here to help you gauge if you're heading down the right path or heading towards common pitfalls. I'm not going to read them out loud here because I'd rather get to your questions. But as you're going through those, think about this. If you've answered yes to the first 6 questions, then your user adoption effort may be in trouble. And you should really consider working with the user adoption expert to help guide you down the right path, because turning around a failed system is much harder than getting it right the first time.
And more expensive.
More expensive, exactly. And if you answer no to the last 6 questions, then time is of the essence. You really need to get an adoption partner and trusted advisor, like Tritons, on your side before you waste more time and effort on a system that's destined to fail, because you are clearly going to be moving down the wrong path and falling into some pitfalls. Okay, so lastly, to help our clients, we have a variety of service offerings, such as our Quick Start Strategy Development, our ROI Rescue Services for projects that aren't going the right direction, as well as training, coaching, full program implementation services, and partnerships. We are not a one-size-fits-all. All of our services are tailored to our customers' needs to accelerate their results. And if you have questions after this webinar, please give us a call. We definitely welcome the opportunity to talk with you and to help you and your organization succeed and gain value from your technology.
Thanks, Jen. So let's switch over to questions and answers. We've had quite a few come in, and we've had a couple come in advance, so we'll try and answer these. Again, as we said earlier, if we don't get to your question during this session, we will reach out to you directly within the next couple of days to provide an answer. Or we're very happy to get on the phone and talk through with people some of your particular needs and challenges, so do feel free to give us a call and schedule a time to talk. One of the first questions that we had come in really was, we're finding long-term customer success to be greatly affected by the client's launch experience. And our consultants do a great job from a technical perspective with the launch, but we wanted some added suggestions for how to have a successful launch. Any ideas? And hopefully this session has given you guys some ideas, but a couple of things that did come to mind is keeping in mind that the launch is only one step in the process, but it is a critical one. And making sure that you're not just focused on that initial launch, but that you have a plan for what you're going to do 1 week, 1 month, all the way after that, especially during that critical initial go-live period of 6 to 12 months. Is so essential. So you need to have a plan of specific actions and making sure you're asking people what you want them to do. With a lot of our clients, we actually say, okay, what are the steps for each user group that they need to be doing week 1, and have we asked them and have we verified they've done it? What do they need to do for week 2? What do they need to do for week 3? And how do we layer onto that? So it makes it easy for them to start to use the system, to get comfortable with it, that we have feedback mechanisms, that learning community that you talked about, and really making sure that they're moving through the process correctly. And then I think obviously the other piece that we talked about is so critical is that working with managers and leaders from the start to help them become aware of their role in driving adoption and their role pre-launch, at launch, and after as well too, to keep it all going. So there are a lot of different things you can do there, but I would say the big one is, do your analysis of what the gap analysis are, and then have a plan to address that, paying particular attention to that 6 to 9 to 12 month window at the initial go live, because that's really, it takes time for people to develop those work habits, and you need to reinforce that all the way through, and that initial launch period window, as I like to think of it, is so critical.
Great. Okay, so Catherine answered a question, and I'm going to try to repeat this, but I'm looking the wrong way here. So we don't have a renewal period, and right now we're having a difficult time measuring our ROI. Our platform is customized, which is the draw for customers, but in terms of measuring concretely, it's very difficult to have a standard measure of ROI. Any advice, please? This is a great question, Catherine. Thank you. I think the simple answer is there shouldn't be a standard measure of ROI. What you need to be doing is working with your customers to help them define what success looks like for them. What value do they need to get out of your system? What does success look like? And then you need to measure to that definition of success. And that won't be the same for all of your customers. So it really does depend on your customers and what they're looking for out of your system.
Right, and Jen, that's so important too, because one of the things in one of our upcoming webinars, we're going to be talking about how to set up your customer success team as a profit center. And when organizations start to look behind the curtain and do this work, they realize that there's a whole process to define success and figure out and map with customers how they're going to achieve it and measure it, but also how they need to engage customers in the pre-sales process to identify what that will look like and set expectations around achieving it and what it's going to take for the customer, and then working with them afterwards to make sure they're on track with those goals, especially if there is the renewal piece. Great. So we've had a couple of questions come in asking about the elements of the gap analysis and what needs to be involved there and what that needs to look like. In the time that we have, it's really tough to do a full-blown thing. In fact, we teach a training course on the analysis process and how to do that. But it really is structured at looking at a couple of things. And we have a structured approach that we take people through that say, what are the different elements that can affect adoption? What are the areas where we typically see barriers? At a high level, we break it down into two key elements, which is sort of motivation and ability. Are people able to use the system if they want to? What are all the things inside their personal control and outside their personal control that can affect ability? So it's not just their skill and knowledge. It could be the business process, the data, the access rights, the adoption of other people that may be higher up in the flow of the organization. That if they put someone in sales use the system correctly so that people in service can deliver the service to customers or ship products or whatever it needs to be, and that finance can invoice them. So those interdependencies between users need to be identified. And then the motivation people part. Are people rewarded and incentivized to use it correctly? Are there issues if people are not using it where they get the feedback mechanism they need to course correct? So there's a lot of elements around that, and there's a lot of work to make sure you structure the gap analysis process correctly to involve people. We talk about triangulation of getting sources from at least 3 different areas and 3 different levels in the organization at minimum, and then wading through in a structured process to create those insights and ahas, and then work directly with the organization to say, is our analysis correct, and what's the action plan to move forward? So it's complex work. It sounds like a gap analysis should be easy and straightforward. It's really not, and it does take a lot of thought to get it right.
So I'm going to go down to my question. Okay, toughest to mitigate. Many times execs feel they can delegate the success of the project. Oh my gosh, that's so true. We say execs can delegate responsibility for ensuring success, but they can't delegate accountability. That needs to rest on the exec. They need to have a stake in the outcome and a reason to keep this as a priority. But delegating responsibility to managers and leaders of the organization is actually a good thing to do because they can't obviously have interactions with all stakeholders. They do need to rely on their leaders within the organization to do that, and that the best person is the direct supervisors and the direct managers of the end users who are expected to use that system because they have daily interactions with them. But it's very important to remember that that business executive at the highest level has ultimate accountability for success.
Absolutely. And when I work with our client executives as well too, there's always that, well, how do we structure this, especially if you're the case where the CEO may be the one who's approving the project, or especially if it's a large-scale project, but they may have, one of their VPs may be the project owner, and making sure that VP is incentivized correctly. For some of the larger projects that we've been on, $50, $100 million projects, there's even board-level accountability involved here, and working with them to map out the reporting process and timing and consequences, and making sure the board is holding people accountable for that at that executive level can be very essential. So it doesn't always have to stop it. The exec may be the accountable person, but the board may be the people who are holding them accountable.
Right.
And working with them is pretty key. Okay. So we have a question here. How do you track progress on change management? This is a great question as well, too. This comes back to you have to have that defined adoption plan, not just a change management plan, to say what are the activities that we need to do.
What are the milestones, too?
The milestones, making sure they're being done. But then I think, so you've got that piece of have we done the work that needs to happen, and then I think to Jen's point, coming back to say measuring the results and doing a learning community around that. So getting some measurements and results and saying we've done the activities, are they having the impact? And then coming and getting the right people in the room and asking the right questions, being able to say, is this effective? Will it be effective tomorrow? How's the world changing? What do we want to shift? What have we learned? What's the best use of our resources going forward? But to be able to do that, you need to have thought through your success measures and your adoption plan to make sure you're able to do that.
So the next one is more of a statement about pitfall number 9. The webinar, the slides, will be available after this, so we won't go over that now. But we can also add some talking points and send those to you so that you have some context to put around the slides for pitfall number 9. And then the last question, what suggestions do you have for addressing low adoption for a mature user group of technical solution who did not apply effective change management during go live and first several months after go live? Okay, so you need to go back to the basics a little bit. If you've gotten down the path of several months after go live and the best practices for user adoption haven't occurred prior to that, I would say it's really important that you start that two-way engagement with stakeholders right away, because you're going to need to figure out where they're struggling and what could help them be more effective with using the system. That would be my key go-to activity if I was in that situation, just because you need to get some input. You need to get engaged and involved with your end users.
Yep. And I think to two other points around that. One is obviously then coming up with what is the plan and matching what are the actions and activities that will be effective now. Because if people have already been trained and the processes are designed and the system's tested and the functionality is working the way you want and it's just not being adopted, well, now you've got a more heavily focused organizational change issue. Training is probably not going to be the right solution, or at least not on its own, though you don't know until you do that gap analysis and figure it out. And you'll have to map out what will be effective and over what time frame. And I think thinking through those pieces also will let you come back and have a conversation with your executives and say, hey, we need to make sure some people here are being accountable, and it's going to need some change of behaviors all the way through. And helping them do that is not an easy process. To your point earlier, it's always easier to get it right the first time than to go back and fix it, but it can be done. It just requires a little bit more work.
Mm-hmm. People are going to have to unlearn some habits that aren't effective.
Exactly. Okay.
We've got 1 minute to spare.
So, I think before we turn this over for a closing, I'd like to just say thank you very much for joining us on our behalf. I hope this was helpful to you. We do have additional webinars coming up in the future, and now I'll turn it over to Steve for some closing comments.
Closing comments. Okay. Hey, everyone. Thanks, and that will conclude our webinar for today. Thanks so much for attending and asking your questions, and we hope that we added some value for each of you today. Everyone attending today will receive a follow-up email that will contain the link to the slides and recording of today's program. And should you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact us for further assistance at info@tritons.com. Thank you again. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, which we will be co-hosting with Amity on August 24th at 1 p.m. And our topic will be operating CSM as a profit center. We hope you will join us. Thank you again, and have a great afternoon.